Have you ever started a new job, opened your benefits packet, and immediately felt overwhelmed? Maybe someone asked, do you want to contribute to a traditional 401k or a Roth 401k? And you thought, I have no idea what that means. So you either picked one at random, or you checked the box that was the same as someone sitting next to you, or maybe you just decided to skip it altogether and figure it out later. The problem is that this is one of the most important decisions many people make in their 20s, and almost nobody explains it in plain English. Today, I want to fix that. Hi, I'm Amy Schaefer, and welcome to Overwhelm to Order. If you're new here, thank you for joining us. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. This channel is all about creating calm clarity around life's difficult decisions. And this series is called What I Wish I Knew When I Was 22. Not because everyone watching is 22, but because there are many things that many of us wish we had understood earlier. And retirement plans, they're definitely one of them. Now, if you're retired and you're already working with a financial planner, or maybe you've been making retirement contributions for years, this video may simply be a refresher. But if you're starting a new job, helping a child navigate their first benefits package, or you've been checking boxes without fully understanding what they mean, well, this video is absolutely for you. In the last video, we talked about the easiest ways that people leave money on the table accidentally. And one of them was missing out on a company match. But let's say you take that first step, you decide to participate. You contribute enough to receive the full company match. You log into your benefits portal, you start filling out the paperwork, and then you see two options: traditional and Roth. And your immediate reaction is, what does that even mean? What box am I supposed to check? What's the difference between a traditional 401k and a Roth 401k? If that's you, you're not alone. Most of us have been there. And the reason this matters is that many people make this choice during enrollment and then never revisit it. A decision that takes just a few minutes today can affect money that you will be living on decades from now. And that's why it's worth taking time today to actually understand what these options are before checking a box and moving on. Today, I'm joined by my friend Paul Mollenkopf, author of Once Upon a Fi. One of the things I love about Paul's approach is that he talks about money in terms of your past, your present, and your future. Your past, it's money that you've already spent and that you may still be paying for. Your present is the money that you use to live your life today. And your future is the money you're setting aside for the person you'll become years from now. Today, we're talking about your future because when you're deciding between a traditional 401k and a Roth 401k, you're really making a decision about how to take care of your future self. But you are also making a decision that impacts the present because of tax implications. The question isn't whether you're investing in your future. The question is, when do you want to pay taxes on that money? I asked Paul to explain one of the more confusing decisions that people have as they are enrolling in a retirement plan. And Paul, thank you so much for joining today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'll try to make it as simple as possible, but it's complicated.
Understand, and I do appreciate you taking the time to help us simplify what really can be a confusing topic. So, if you had 2 minutes or less to explain the difference between a traditional or a Roth retirement account, what would you say?
2 minutes. Here we go. Well, first of all, let's talk about the similarities between the two. They are both 401k plans offered through an employer. They're employer sponsored retirement plans. They both grow tax free, which is really crucial. This century, so the last 26 years, the US stock market has pretty much averaged a 10% growth per year. So when you have that happening for your money tax free, that puts you in a great position. So either one is going to do that for you, and either one's a good place to be. The difference between the two is pretty much all tax related. So a traditional 401k is a pre tax vehicle. which means if I put $2,000 into my traditional 401k, that $2,000 is reduced from my taxable income that year. So what'll happen is you'll put $2,000 in your traditional account and you'll see your paycheck go down by 1,800, 1,700, depending on your tax rate, where a Roth 401k is post tax. So you're paying taxes on that $2,000 as ordinary income, and then that money goes into the Roth account. So that's the difference on the front end tax wise. On the back end, when you start withdrawing, that's when you're taxed on the traditional 401k. So every penny you've put in there, every penny you're going to withdraw is going to get taxed as ordinary income when you pull that money out. With a Roth 401k, that money is all yours. You paid that initial tax on the initial contribution. That contribution is no longer going to be taxed, and any growth on it's no longer going to be taxed. So it's a great position to be in when you're at that retirement age and you've got a big lump sum in an account. To have it in an account that you never have to pay tax on, it's certainly a better position than uh, a traditional where you're going to pay taxes on every dime you pull out of there.
Can you explain it, maybe even using some numbers just to give us an idea of what that might actually look like?
Yeah, let's just take one easy example here. We'll try to keep it simple with the numbers. So let's say this paycheck, I want to contribute $200. So if I decide to contribute that $200 to a traditional 401k, it's not going to take $200 from my paycheck essentially because the 200 comes from your taxable income, which goes down with a traditional. It's pre-tax. You're going to get that match hopefully with your very kind employer. So you're putting $400 in your traditional 401ks, and your paycheck is going to go down by $170 maybe, depending on what your tax rate is. So you feel less of that burden up front with a traditional 401k. With a Roth, I want to put $200 in that. I get the $200 match, so 400 goes in my Roth 401k, but the $200 is completely removed from my paycheck. So it cost me 200 to put it in the Roth IRA, but now I've completely wiped out that tax burden on the Roth. The traditional, whenever I take that 200 out, I'm going to have to pay taxes on it, and I'm going to have to pay taxes on all the gains that occur with the traditional 401k. Where the Roth, all taxes are done.
So, for someone who is just starting their career, what should they really be thinking about between these two?
Ask yourself that question. Do you think you're going to be making a higher income later on down the road than you are now? Do you plan on working those 40 years? Are you trying to make a goal of retiring early? There's a lot of factors involved. Almost always, the Roth is the direction I would guide someone to go, simply because on average, you're going to have a higher income later on down your career than you are when you're just starting.
Do you mind sharing maybe a illustration or a specific example just to help people understand as easily as possible what we're talking about here?
In preparing for this, I did a little calculation just to illustrate the difference between the two vehicles and really the difference between paying that tax up front versus down the road. So if you were to invest $2,000 just year one when you're 22 years old and you take it out 40 years later when you're 62, that amount, assuming an 8% growth rate, would come to $43,500. That's how much would be in either account, depending on, if you put in the traditional or the Roth, that $2,000 is going to grow at an 8% rate over 40 years to be 43,500. Now, with the traditional, remember, you didn't pay taxes on that when you put that $2,000 in there. So you're going to get taxed on that entire $43,500. If you're at a 25% tax rate on it, the amount you actually have is about 32,650. When you have the Roth, you paid that tax up front. That entire 43,500 is yours. So it's a good illustration where $2,000 today, I'm going to pay that 10% tax rate so I can get it in my Roth. So it cost me $200 to invest that 2,000, where it didn't cost me anything to invest in the traditional. Down the road, that traditional is worth 32,000 plus to me because I have to pay taxes on it. The Roth is worth 43,500. So it's a matter of paying $200 today versus around 11,000 40 years from now. If you have the bulk of your money in that tax-free vehicle, your future self is going to be very grateful.
So, what about for those that are watching who maybe are parents or someone who's in their 40s or 50s and they're still having the option of deciding between a Roth and a 401k? Why would somebody want to stick with a traditional potentially as a working adult?
If you're in your 40s and you're like at the top of your career, you're making more money than you'll ever make again, or you're paying that high tax rate now and you're determining whether it should be a traditional or a Roth, that may be a situation where you would go traditional simply because you've got that high tax rate today. You want to avoid that so you can put all that money into a traditional and have that lower your tax hit today.
Have you ever considered or talked to folks that maybe do part Roth and part traditional? Is that an option?
It certainly is. I should mention that the Roth 401k was not invented until 2006. Give your parents some grace for not telling you about it because it didn't exist back then. So it's a relatively new vehicle. The Roth IRA, which is a similar thing we can discuss, was invented in 1998. When I was 22, when you were 22, and when these people were talking about, these weren't options that we had that we do have now. But I did mention they are employer sponsored when they're 401ks, both traditional and Roth. Sometimes you may not have the option. Some employers only offer a traditional or neither. If that's the case, and actually, even if you do have a Roth 401k, you can go and open your own Roth IRA at the same time and contribute to that as well. Personally, that's what I did. I did not have a Roth 401k option where I worked, so I loaded up on the traditional 401k, but the additional funds that I had that I wanted to put in to my retirement accounts, I put into a Roth IRA. The maximum you can do in 2026 into the Roth IRA is $7,500.
And with the company match, aren't there some rules about that as well that people need to be aware of?
This is part of the reason that we're talking about how complicated this is because IRS guidelines and rules change all the time. Employer plans are all different. They can be set up very differently where you may not have an option for a Roth 401k. It really does depend on the employer whether they will match into a Roth or a traditional. What could happen, just give you a possible scenario, is that your company does offer a Roth 401k but does not offer the match into it. They only offer the match into the traditional. If that's the case, it may very well be a good idea to do your contributions into a Roth 401k and then accept your employer's contributions in a traditional, and you have both.
So people really could have two different pathways, even in their same company account. Plus, they have options outside their traditional company 401k, um, doing the external IRAs and things like that, especially with the Roth, is what you're saying.
A Roth 401k, like a traditional 401k, does lock you in. Um, it is a retirement plan. You do face penalties if you try to withdraw any funds before age 59 and a half. With a Roth IRA, not being employer sponsored, you do have access to any contributions you've made over the course of years. So if you open a Roth IRA and you're maxing that thing out, and in 10 years you've got $75,000 in contributions and another 50,000 in gains, you might have a Roth IRA worth $125,000 at age 40, let's say, and you're at a very high tax rate. When you put money into your Roth, you are paying that tax today. The only way you're not eligible for a Roth IRA is if you are real high income or no income. My 6-year-old granddaughter can have a Roth IRA if by chance she is a model on somebody's website and gets paid $500. That's her money. She can put it in a Roth IRA. It really is open to anybody, where a Roth 401k, you're kind of relying on your employer to offer that plan. We should probably talk rollover too. That's an option in both a traditional and a Roth, where if I have a Roth 401k with my employer and I build up that account, and 5 years from now, I leave that employer for another job or go off and start my own business, whatever it may be, that Roth 401k can be rolled over into a Roth IRA, which opens up and expands those options to you before you're 59 and a half. You can pull any funds that you've contributed to a Roth IRA, where a Roth 401k, you are locked in until you're 59 and a half, unless you face the penalty.
People still don't contribute. Any thoughts on that or any insights there?
I think a lot of younger people just starting off feel like, I'm going to make more money later. I can worry about it then. While that may be true, getting that money in your account as soon as possible starts that compounding as soon as possible. And the more years that has to grow, the better off you are. Investing $300 today for 40 years versus 20 years from now for only 20 years is a massive difference. We're talking $300. It's not a ton, but over the course of compounding in decades, it can turn out to be a really big number.
One thing that I remember reading recently is how many people actually don't contribute to their employer retirement plan. And it's actually, the number was pretty shocking, a lot more than I thought. Uh, can you share anything about that?
We talked about how the Roth is a relatively new vehicle. In a way, the 401k, I believe that came about in the 70s. So prior to that, most people worked that same job for 40, 50 years and had a pension that they lived on through their retirement. Nowadays, there is Social Security out there. Your retirement funds are kind of up to you now. It's your responsibility to make sure you have the funds needed when the retirement time comes. There's still that transition happening, I think, where people don't realize that they need to take care of this stuff themselves now. So security is always out there, but especially if you're 22 years old right now, that's really a variable that we have no idea what's going to be available to you at that when 65 comes.
In a previous video, I talked about leaving money on the table and how important it is to look into the company match from your employers, whether it is ultimately a Roth or a traditional. That money's automatically deducted from your paycheck. So once that process happens, you don't really miss it because it's just automatic. So can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how important that is?
Absolutely critical, and you're absolutely right. Most people, that's why the government does tax withholding. You don't really realize how much you're paying in taxes coming out of your paycheck every day or every week or 2 weeks because it's not part of your net pay. It's not available to you, so it's just not there. And I think those 401k deductions can work the same way. You get to determine, obviously, how much you want to contribute and how much you want to lower your net pay today. If you can get yourself to a point where this is my net pay that I'm bringing in, and I don't really miss the contribution that I'm making every paycheck as well, um, you'll be amazed how it'll grow over the course of the years. One of my favorite financial books is The Simple Path to Wealth, and the author J.L. Collins talks about how he basically thinks set it and forget it is the best way to go. And keep it simple, keep consistent, keep steady. And you don't really even have to manage it. You don't have to look at it. But in 20 years, if you do look at it, he says, make sure there's a cardiologist nearby because you may be amazed at how much money is in those accounts.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would want people to know?
First of all, one thing we haven't touched on that I understand you're going to touch on in future episodes is the HSA, which does factor into this. If your company does offer a health savings account plan as well, that's an excellent, excellent vehicle to invest in. I'm looking forward to that episode because there's a lot of information there as well. Whether they decide on the traditional or Roth, and obviously I'm kind of leaning people towards the Roth, but either 401k that you decide to invest in, I would recommend to people if you have that kind of money to invest, make sure you take full advantage of any company match you have. Once you've hit that point, I think the next best option for the continuing investments past the matching amount is an HSA. And then once you fully fund an HSA, right now, an individual, the maximum is $3,850 for 2026. If you are in such a position where you can reach your total match in a 401k, do that first. And then if you have additional, where if you have that 3850 where you can fully fund your HSA for the year, that would be the next step that I would recommend. Then I would go back to the 401k. Secondly, one thing I really want to make sure everybody understands listening to this is it's so easy to get lost in the weeds with this stuff and get overwhelmed. And the worst thing that can happen is you get overwhelmed to the point where you just don't pull the trigger on anything. The one thing I like to point out to anybody getting started in all this is please avoid the biggest investing mistake so many people make, and that's not doing it. Even if I say I think the Roth 401k is the better vehicle than the traditional, and you don't listen to me and you max out your traditional 401k for 40 years, you're going to be rich. There's not going to be any worries there. I have become certified as a personal financial wellness consultant. That's kind of a fancy way to say I'm a money coach. I like to help people with their money. I'm not a CFP. I'm not a tax accountant, attorney, none of that kind of stuff. I'm just simply somebody that has gone through this myself. I know the ins and outs, and I'd like to guide people, but I'm not an advisor.
Really what we're hoping to do with this channel is that this is really a jumping off point for people, and maybe a nudge, a reminder, some clarity, in the hopes that people will look into some of the resources, even some of the references that you made earlier, to do some of their own digging and understanding, and using this as a way to help provide some clarity and give them it in a little bit more layman's terms.
Bottom line to it all is you can study, you can, research like crazy and try to know. You can read all 2.5 million words in the federal tax code if you want. The most important thing is to get your money into these accounts and get that ball rolling, get that compounding happening. It takes a little while, but once you start seeing those numbers build on their own without the contributions you're making, just the previous contributions and what growth has happened continues to compound. That'll be motivating. It's fun to watch those numbers go up.
The bottom line really is just start, right?
Absolutely. Don't get so lost in all the details that you miss the big picture. And the big picture is get that money in there. Now, I can tell you that I would prefer a Roth 401k over a traditional, but you may not have access to that Roth. Get your money into the market, get it growing. I know you're talking about investing and ways to invest in future episodes. Consistency is really the key. Um, and that's the great thing about these employer sponsored plans is you can just say, take $100 every paycheck or whatever it is you can afford. You really end up not really missing it because you never see it, but you're going to look at those accounts someday and you'll see it then.
We really appreciate you joining us. And I know I appreciate your ability to just explain the financial concepts in a very simple, straightforward way that our viewers can understand. And I'm sure they will appreciate that as well. So thank you again for being here. And for those who are interested in learning more, I'm going to put in the link below a reference to Paul's book, Once Upon a Fi. So please take a look at that. And again, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's talk about what all of this means for someone who is staring at that enrollment form and trying to decide which box to check. Notice that both options are retirement accounts. Both options are helping you save for your future self. The difference is simply when the taxes are paid. And that's really the purpose of today's video. The goal isn't to tell you which one to choose. The goal is to help you understand the question. Here's the simplest way I think about it. A traditional retirement account gives you a tax break today. A Roth retirement account gives you a tax break later. That's really the heart of the decision. With traditional, you generally pay less tax now. With Roth, you generally pay taxes now, but qualified withdrawals in retirement can be tax free. So the question becomes, do you think your tax rate is likely to be lower today or later? So let's go back to Paul's idea of your future self. Imagine you're 22 years old and just starting your first professional job. Maybe you're making $50,000 or $60,000 a year. For many people in that situation, a Roth contribution can be very attractive because they're often in one of the lowest tax brackets they'll experience during their career. That doesn't mean Roth is always right, and it doesn't mean traditional is wrong. But it's one reason many financial professionals encourage younger workers to at least consider Roth contributions. Here's what often happens: because we're confused, we tell ourselves, we'll come back to it later. And then later becomes next month becomes next year. And before we know it, years have gone by and we're still not sure what those boxes meant. And that's completely understandable. But spending just a few minutes understanding the decision today is usually much easier than trying to untangle it years later. Now, if you take nothing else from this video today, remember this: traditional and Roth are both ways of investing in your future. The difference isn't whether you're saving, the difference is when you pay taxes. And here's your next step. The next time you're asked to choose between a traditional retirement contribution and a Roth retirement contribution, don't just check a box and move on. Pause and ask yourself one question: am I choosing a tax break today or a tax break later? You don't have to know the perfect answer, but once you understand that question, you're no longer just checking a box. You're making an informed decision about your future. But here's something I didn't realize when I was younger: choosing a Roth or traditional isn't actually the last decision. Once your money goes into that retirement account, you still have to make a decision how it gets invested. So you may be asking yourself, okay, I picked Roth. Now, what do I invest in? And that's where many people become overwhelmed all over again. And that's what we'll talk about next time as we continue to focus on your future. Now, I do want to mention something very important. I am not a financial advisor, an accountant, or a tax attorney, and this is not personal finance advice. Everyone's tax situation is completely different, and the goal isn't to tell you which one to choose. The goal is to help you understand the question. So please circle back with your financial advisors and people that you trust to make sure that you're choosing the right option for you. And while we're talking about retirement plans, don't forget to check out some of the other benefits that your employer may offer. Many employers provide matching contributions, as was mentioned in a previous video. Some offer employee stock purchase plans. Others offer health savings accounts or HSAs, and those can provide unique tax advantages for healthcare expenses. Now, we'll cover topics like that as I continue the series, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 22. Because when I was 22, I heard people talk about retirement plans and taxes and investing and mutual funds. The problem wasn't that nobody explained it. The problem was it sounded like a foreign language. And I understood just enough to know they were important, but not enough to understand how they applied to my life. So I tuned it out. And looking back, I don't think most people avoid these decisions because they don't care. I think they're overwhelmed by the terminology that they don't understand. And that is one of the reasons I'm creating this series, to translate complicated topics into plain English so people understand the questions they're being asked. Because overlooking decisions like the ones that we're talking about on this channel, they can have a huge impact over time. Now, if you've enjoyed today's conversation, I'll include some links below for Paul's book, Once Upon a Fi, as well as some of the other resources that he referenced. If no one ever explained retirement plans to you, you're not alone. And if someone did explain them, but it felt like they were speaking a completely different language, you're not alone either. Most of us were given information, but not enough context to understand how it actually applied to our lives. But once you understand the basics, the decision becomes much less intimidating. If this video helped bring a little more clarity to something that has been overwhelming, I would love it if you would subscribe. And remember, you don't need to know everything today. You just need to know enough information to take the next step forward to help you go from overwhelm to order. I'll see you in the next video.